new year, right? And this morning I'm going to talk to you about negativity. So there was a farmer, and all his neighbors were farmers. And everyone in the area considered him to be the biggest pessimist in the world. His closest neighbor, who happened to be an optimist, did everything he could think of to encourage him every time they spoke. Leaning over the fence that divided their properties on one side, he said, "Looks like the sun's going to shine good today." "Yeah," came the droopy reply, "probably be so hot the crops will dry out and shrivel up and be no good." A couple days later, "Looks like rain, don't you think?" "Yep, and it'll probably flood the fields and ruin the crops. Just wait and see." Ever the pessimist, never with any hope in everything, this was the way it went year after year, season after season. The only thing the man seemed to come out of his gloom for was duck hunting. A transformation came over him every time he went out and brought home duck for dinner. So the good-natured farmer decided on a plan to cheer up his neighbor. And so he invested months and months and months getting ready. And finally everything is in place, so he invites his grouchy neighbor to go duck hunting. Still grumbling about everything and anything, yet he agrees to go with just the faintest hint of a smile tugging at one corner of his frown. All the way out to the marsh, he asks a bunch of questions about the new bird dog his neighbor has with him. No detail was forthcoming. "He's an amazingly talented dog, just you wait and see," was the only reply that came. Well, hours later, the grumbler gets off a shot and a duck falls from the sky, and the dog's owner calls out, "Get it!" And the bird dog takes off at a run, running right across the top of the water. Grabbing the bird softly in his mouth, the dog brings the duck back and drops it right at the feet of the man who shot it, and then sits back, wagging his tail and waiting to be commended. The pessimist shakes his head in disbelief. Seems pretty doggone foolish to spend so much time and money on a dog that can't even swim. Have you met people like that? I remember Bill Gaither once said at a seminar that they had a lady in his church in Alexandria that every time she came into the room, the lights went out. It's a whole new year. People are making new resolutions that they will struggle to keep. Those that set their mind to exercise more have joined a gym. Statistics show that 80% of those that join gyms in January quit going within 5 months. In fact, gym owners count on the fact that only 18% of their members will use them consistently because they couldn't hold them, right? Now, I'm going to give you a pointer today. If you are unhappy with your weight, but know that you're unlikely, like me, to go through with the diet and exercise that losing weight entails, I have a great solution for you. Okay, the first thing that you need to do is make sure that you have an analog bathroom scale like that one. Don't buy one of those digital ones, they're disheartening. Get that old style one that your mom had next to the stationary bike that she used to hang clothes on. Was that just me? I remember my mom's. Next, step onto that scale. And as soon as it hits the number that you like, get off. It's that simple. "Honey, I lost 3 pounds this week. Want to go to Golden Corral?" Pessimist. I don't weigh myself every day just because I don't want to wake up with that kind of thing on my mind. Most of us have had someone ask, maybe those Facebook things that some of you like to do. I refuse to play those. But whether we're an optimist, a realist, or a pessimist, there are those silly questions that we're asked that are supposed to show us which one we are. That glass half full or half empty. test. However, it's not really that simple, is it? Most people aren't just one or the other. Most of us move from one to the other depending on the circumstances going on in our lives. But there are certainly people that focus on the negative circumstances in their lives. They are always struggling. I remember that line in the song. Any of you remember that old country song that said, "If it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all"? Right? It's that thought process. But what does the Bible say about negativity? Now, there's several examples of negativity in the Bible, and we're going to look at them this morning. And the first guy I want to look at is Jonah. He was a prophet of God. That always gets me. When reading this story, I'm thinking, this was the guy you picked? He was a prophet of God. A man whose life it was to serve God and his people, and Jonah was a pessimist. God gave him a job, and he said, no thanks. He didn't get the fact that it wasn't a request. So when he adamantly refused, God persisted and pursued. So after spending 3 nights in the belly of a big fish, it finally dawns on Jonah that God wasn't kidding. So Jonah apologizes, and God has the fish toss him on the shore. Jonah begrudgingly does what God told him to do, and the people of Nineveh repented. And God relented because of their wholehearted repentance. Now, I can tell you that if we had some kind of a revival like that, and I preached, and half of this church repented, I'd be throwing a party at home. Woo-hoo-hoo! Man! But you know what Jonah did? He had a different reaction. It says in Jonah chapter 4, it says, but to Jonah, this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord, isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? This is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you're a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. He's ticked because God has mercy and love. That's about as pessimistic as you can get. Right? And the story ends with Jonah moping under a dried up plant. I'm going to ask this. You don't need to raise your hands. Are you a moper? Is there any? No, I don't want to find out if there's any mopers around. Do you sit around and mope about your circumstances? Are you unappreciative of God's love and mercy to you, who were once dead in your sin? So often we're like spoiled children that have been given everything on a silver platter. When things don't go as we would like, we throw a tantrum. The Israelites are stark examples of negativity. I probably told this story a couple of years back, but Paul and I went on vacation, and the resort picked us up in this big bus, and the actual resort was about an hour from, I guess it was 45 minutes from the airport. And so we're in this bus, and there was an elderly Jewish man and Jewish woman sitting in the front. They were matriarchs of a family, and they had paid for all like 30 of their kids and grandkids to come to this resort for the week. The second that woman sat down, she started griping. The air conditioning isn't working right. It's Florida, so the air conditioning is working right. I don't know why they can't. It was nonstop for 45 minutes. I'm thinking, if her husband is still sane, it's because his hearing went about 30 years ago. The Israelites were just horrible examples of gripers and complainers. If you follow their story from slavery into the promised land of Canaan, you'll see a constant drip, drip, drip of irritating murmuring and complaining. Paul and Stevie could tell you this, that I don't like irritating noises. In my car, I don't like them. That's why I love newer cars, because generally you don't have those noises for a couple of years, right? And then if it's a Saturn, it starts about 2 years into it, and things start vibrating off. But I don't like those noises. And I remember I was in college at Azusa Pacific, and I lived with the trailers. Anita, you remember those trailers, right? We called them the mods. Yeah? They're out beyond the baseball field. Well, these mods they're a trailer, and they had these fake wood rafters on them. They were made out of styrofoam and painted. Well, crickets would get up in there. And they drove me insane. And so I went out and bought a case of Raid, and I started digging in those styrofoam rafters and spraying. Dig spray, dig spray, dig spray, until they were all gone. I must have missed sleep for 4 or 5 nights just staying up and listening to crickets to make sure I got them all. And I often think that that's what God must have thought about the Israelites' constant complaints. I know Moses did. I know he was yelling to God, "Make it stop, Lord. Make it stop." They complained about the lack of water. They complained about the lack of food. When God supplied them with both, they were unappreciative. This manna is boring. They said it tasted like honey biscuits. Anybody ever have that Marie Callender's, they call it cornbread, but it's more like a huge cake, right? With the honey butter? I'm sorry, but if you make something taste like that, I'm not going to complain. They complained and complained, and so nothing satisfied their negative attitudes. God got them to the edge of the promised land, and they decided to send spies into the land. They sent 12 spies into Canaan. And when they got back, this is what they said. You can follow along as I read. It's fairly lengthy. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh Barnea, is what it's called, in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and yeah, it does flow with milk and honey. Here's its fruit. They had to carry it between one bunch of grapes. They had to carry, 2 men had to carry them between them on a pole. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev, the Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country, and the termites are coming all over us. No, that's not in there. And the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. That's what it was. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We can't attack those people. They're stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. And they said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." You'll notice the 10 spies focused on these descendants of Anak, or the Nephilim. One theory is these people were the result of fallen angels coupling with women. And so they had these men of renown, a lot of maybe our mythological characters possibly come from them, but that's where giants come from. That's what the thought, one of the major thoughts is that, and we know that these were giants. In fact, Goliath, many years later, is descended from these people. They were huge. And 10 of the 12 spies couldn't see beyond their obstacles. Oh yeah, the land's great, but there are giants, and we got no shot at defeating them. And the people of Israel bought their negative report hook, line, and sinker. How many of you know that quite often the majority is not right? Have you figured that out? In fact, quite often the majority is wrong simply because of their negative attitudes. Because the people rebelled against Moses and against God and listened to the negative reports rather than trust God, the existing adult generation was not allowed to enter the promised land except the 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb, that had given a good report of the land. None of the adults that left Egypt lived to see the land that they were promised other than those 2. None of them. All because they chose negativity. I picked out that word carefully, chose. In the next few weeks, I've been looking at a book that I really like. Some of you will recall that we had been praying for Stan Toller. He was a former general of our, general superintendent of ours, and he passed away recently. He wrote 107 books. In fact, someone said he never had an unpublished thought. And one of the books he wrote about, because he was in charge of a leadership group with John Maxwell, and he wrote about our attitude, and it's called The Power of Your Attitude. And we're going to be looking at some of the things over the next few weeks that he brings up. Negativity is soul-sucking. Negativity causes us to either remember only the failures in our past, or maybe we remember our past a lot better than what it really was and compare it negatively to our future, right? In fact, the Israelites were so hung up and so negative that they actually said, you know, when we were back in Egypt, man, we had onions and leeks and all sorts of nice, tasty food. We were good. Guys, you were in slavery. Have you forgotten that? It's kind of like the good old days. You know, we always talk about the good old days. You know, I don't remember them being all that good. That negatively influences our present and our future. The Israelites were unable to let go of their past and compared every hardship to a past of slavery that they somehow recalled as having had everything they needed. Negativity destroyed their future just as surely as it can destroy our own. And did you notice the contrast between those 10 spies that gave the negative report and the remarks made by Caleb? The 10 said, "We can't." And Caleb said, "We certainly can." Caleb and Joshua were men that put their faith in God and looked past the giants. In fact, in the very next chapter, God tells us why Caleb is different. Numbers 14, he says, "But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it." God in the Bible says in 6 different places that Caleb followed him wholeheartedly. The difference between Caleb and Jonah was that Jonah followed God begrudgingly, and Caleb followed him wholeheartedly. Caleb was an optimist. He was optimistic because he put his faith in God. In fact, he was so trusting and optimistic that later he would go to Joshua when they were in the land. I love this part of the scripture. Now the people of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, "You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea, about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land, and I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So on that day, Moses swore to me, the land in which your feet have walked will be your inheritance, and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly." How did he follow him? Wholeheartedly. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Imagine that. I'm always thankful when I can make it out of bed in the morning. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites, those giants, were there and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said. I'm going to do it. I'm going to kick the giants from here to Tuesday. Well, I know everybody this year has kicked out the giants. There you go, Jimmy. But do you see that? The Lord helping me, man. I'm going to kick them out. You see, Caleb instinctively understood something that would later be written by the Apostle Paul more than 1,000 years later. In Philippians 4:13, he says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." What is your attitude? Are you trusting God wholeheartedly for your future? Or are you focusing on every problem that comes your way? We're starting a new year. Are you going to allow yourself to be mired in negativity? Or are you going to follow God wholeheartedly and put your whole faith and trust in the God that gave you life everlasting? Your attitude is a choice. Choose to put away the griping and complaining, the fears and the failures. As a church, we're about to start a new project, and we don't even know how we're going to pay for it. He does, because he told us to do it. We agree. Board, we agree. This is something we ought to do, that God wants us to do. And so, we set out. I'm not going to worry about it. In motorcycle training, I know some of the guys, Paul and Dennis, and you guys will understand. In motorcycle training, they always teach you that your bike is going to go where you look. Isn't that right? I remember when I was driving Paul's Volkswagen, she said, "Don't run over that knife in the road." I ran right over it. Got a flat tire. You're always going to go where you look. And the same is true about your attitude. If you stare at the obstacles in your path, you're going to fall. One of the first verses that I memorized as a kid tells us what we should be looking at. And I can still don't. It's funny, if we can memorize it when we're kids, we can remember it, isn't it? Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. That's where you're looking. Don't look at the obstacles. Don't be negative. Don't mope. Don't complain. Don't do God's will begrudgingly. Do it with a joyous heart. Let's bow our heads. I don't know where you're at, what struggles you've been going through, but I do know this. This life really doesn't last very long. I know that no matter what you've been going through, it seems like an eternity, but it isn't. And in a heartbeat, this world will be gone. And I know that God wants us to follow him wholeheartedly. Not to fear the giants, or fear the waves like Peter did, or grumble at outcomes that we really had nothing to do with. God wants us to glorify his holy name. When you're a pessimist, people are not drawn to you. You may not have noticed that. When you're a pessimist, people don't want to be around you very much. And if you're a pessimist Christian, no one wants to be part of that. I'd ask that you search your heart today. And if you're a Christian and you have that negativity inside you, if you're going to make a New Year's resolution, here's a great one. Lord, I give it all to you. I'm going to quit worrying, murmuring, complaining, all that stuff. I'm done with all that. It's not on my shoulders. I give it to you. That's a great New Year's resolution. Quit carrying it. Come to me, all you who weary and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. That's what he wants for you. If you haven't accepted Jesus, listen, you've got no rest. You could sleep your whole life away and not have the rest that someone who is deeply in love with Jesus Christ has.